The dust from the noon train hadn't even settled when Victoria Rose realized that Edmund Hartwell, the mail-order groom she'd traveled 900 miles to meet, was not coming. She stood alone on the wooden platform at Oroville Station in California, clutching a worn carpet bag and a faded photograph of a man she'd never laid eyes on in person, her stomach twisting with each passing minute that stretched into an hour. The summer heat of 1882 beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the layers of her traveling dress as other passengers dispersed into the bustling Gold Rush town, leaving her increasingly isolated on the empty platform. The station master, a gruff man with tobacco-stained whiskers, finally approached her with something resembling pity in his weathered face. "Miss, we're closing up for the afternoon. You got somewhere to go?" Victoria swallowed hard, fighting back the humiliation that threatened to choke her. "I was supposed to meet my intended here, Edmund Hartwell. Do you know if he left any message?" The man scratched his chin, then shook his head slowly. "No, Hartwell's been by here in weeks, miss. You sure he knew which day you were arriving?" She'd sent 3 letters confirming the date, each one carefully written by candlelight in her Boston boarding house, each one filled with cautious optimism about their future together. "Yes, I'm certain." "Well, I'm sorry, but I can't let you stay here. Town's got a boarding house down Main Street if you need lodging." He tipped his hat awkwardly and retreated into the station office, clearly wanting no part of her predicament. Victoria stood there, paralyzed by indecision and the crushing weight of her circumstances. She'd used nearly every cent she had for the train fare west, answering Edmund's advertisement for a wife with desperation born of necessity. At 23, she'd been working as a seamstress in Boston, barely scraping by after her father's death left her with nothing but debts. Edmund's letters had promised a ranch, stability, a home. Now she had perhaps $5 to her name and no prospects in a town where she knew absolutely no one. She was still standing there, fighting tears when she heard boots on the platform behind her. "Madam, you need some help." Victoria turned to find a tall cowboy watching her with genuine concern in his striking blue eyes. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a dusty brown hat. His clothes were work-worn but clean, and there was something solid and trustworthy in his stance, though Victoria had learned the hard way that appearances could deceive. "I'm managing, thank you," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her situation with quick intelligence. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you've been standing here for near 2 hours now. I was loading supplies across the way and couldn't help but notice you waiting for someone." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure entirely. "I was. He didn't come." Understanding flickered across his face, along with something that might have been anger on her behalf. "Mail order arrangement," Victoria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing more of his handsome face. "That's a low thing, leaving a lady stranded. I'm Knox Parker. I work at the Circle K Ranch about 8 miles north of here." He hesitated, then continued, "Look, I know you don't know me from Adam, but I can't in good conscience leave you here with nowhere to go. The boarding house Mrs. Chen runs is respectable, and I'd be happy to escort you there and cover your lodging until you figure out your next step." "I couldn't possibly accept charity from a stranger," Victoria said automatically, even as her practical mind screamed that she had few other options. "It's not charity, it's common decency," Knox replied firmly. "This town's rough around the edges, miss. Gold Rush brought all kinds through here, and not all of them gentlemen. It's getting on toward evening, and you shouldn't be out alone after dark." He gestured toward the street where the sun was indeed sinking lower, casting long shadows between the buildings. At least let me see you safely to Mrs. Chen's. What you do after that is your own affair. Victoria studied him carefully, trying to discern his true intentions. She'd become skilled at reading men during her years working in Boston, and everything about Knox Parker suggested genuine concern rather than ulterior motives. His eyes met hers directly, honest and clear. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I appreciate your kindness." Relief crossed his features. "My horse is just over here. We can walk if you'd prefer, but it's a fair distance in this heat." "Walking is fine," Victoria said quickly, not ready to trust herself that close to any man just yet. Knox nodded understanding and reached for her carpetbag. "At least let me carry this." They set off down the dusty main street of Oroville, and Victoria tried not to feel overwhelmed by the rough frontier town. It was nothing like Boston. False-fronted buildings lined the wide street, and the sound of a badly tuned piano drifted from a saloon. Men in dusty work clothes lounged on porches, and the whole place smelled of horses, dust, and opportunity. Gold had been discovered in these mountains back in the 50s, and though the easy pickings were gone, the town still bustled with miners, ranchers, and merchants trying to make their fortunes. "How long have you been in Oroville?" Victoria asked, partly from curiosity and partly to fill the awkward silence. "About 5 years now," Knox replied. "Came out from Missouri after my father died. My uncle owns the Circle K and he needed help running it. It's hard work, but honest. I've managed to save up enough to think about starting my own spread someday." He glanced at her. "What brought you west, if you don't mind me asking, besides the arrangement that fell through?" Victoria considered how much to reveal. "My father passed last year. He was a shopkeeper, but when he died, I discovered he'd accumulated significant debts. I sold everything to pay them and found myself with no family and few prospects. When I saw Mr. Hartwell's advertisement, it seemed like providence." "I'm sorry about your father," Knox said quietly. "And I'm sorry that man let you down. That's no way to treat a lady." They reached the boarding house, a neat 2-story building with a sign that read Chen's Respectable Lodging for Ladies and Families. True to Knox's word, it looked clean and well-maintained. A Chinese woman in her 50s answered Knox's knock, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Knox Parker, you haven't visited in months. Your uncle is well." "Yes, madam, Mrs. Chen. Uncle Robert's fit as ever, just keeps me too busy to get to town much." He gestured to Victoria. "This is Miss Victoria Rose. She's new to Oroville and needs lodging. I was hoping you might have a room available." Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes took in Victoria's situation immediately, but her expression remained warmly welcoming. "Of course. Come in, Miss Rose. I have a lovely room on the 2nd floor, very quiet." She named a price that made Victoria's heart sink. It would deplete her funds in less than a week. Knox must have seen her expression because he smoothly interrupted. "Put it on my account, Mrs. Chen. Miss Rose is a friend." "Mr. Parker, I cannot," Victoria began. "We'll discuss it later," Knox said firmly. "Right now you need rest and a decent meal. Mrs. Chen's cooking is the best in Oroville and I won't hear any arguments." Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "Come, Miss Rose. Let me show you the room and then we'll have supper. You look exhausted from your journey." Victoria found herself swept upstairs to a small but immaculately clean room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. After Mrs. Chen left her to freshen up, Victoria sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She'd been so hopeful, so desperate for this new beginning, and now she was stranded in a strange town, dependent on the charity of a cowboy she'd just met. What was she going to do? A knock on the door interrupted her tears. "Miss Rose." "Supper is ready when you are," Mrs. Chen called gently. Victoria wiped her eyes, smoothed her hair, and tried to compose herself. She couldn't fall apart now. She'd survived her father's death and the loss of everything familiar. She would survive this too. Downstairs, she found Knox still waiting, seated at a large dining table with several other boarders. He stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. Mrs. Chen served a delicious meal of chicken, rice, and vegetables, and Victoria realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. The food helped restore some of her equilibrium, as did the pleasant conversation around the table. The other boarders included a schoolteacher, a widow who worked at the general store, and a young couple who'd come west to start a bakery. After supper, Knox walked with Victoria onto the front porch where they could talk privately. The evening air had cooled pleasantly, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I need to head back to the ranch," Knox said, settling his hat back on his head. "But I'll be back in town in a few days. Meanwhile, you think about what you want to do. Mrs. Chen might know of work available if you want to stay in Oroville. If you want to go back east, I can help arrange that too." "Why are you doing this?" Victoria asked bluntly. "You don't know me." Knox was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My mother died when I was young, and my father raised me alone. He taught me that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about your character. You needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. It's as simple as that." He paused, then added more softly, "And I suppose I know something about being alone in the world. It's not a good feeling." Something in his voice suggested depths of loneliness that matched her own. Victoria found herself warming to him despite her better judgment. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I promise I'll repay you as soon as I'm able." "Knox," he corrected gently. "And I'm not worried about repayment. Just take care of yourself, Miss Rose." "Victoria," she offered in return, managing a small smile. He returned the smile, and it transformed his whole face, making him seem younger and less careworn. "Victoria, that's a pretty name, suits you." He tipped his hat. "Good night, I'll see you in a few days." Victoria watched him walk away into the gathering darkness, leading his horse down the street toward the edge of town. She felt strangely bereft at his departure, which was ridiculous considering she'd only met him a few hours ago. But there had been something steady and reassuring about his presence, something that made her feel less alone. The next few days passed in a blur of adjustment. Mrs. Chen proved to be a kind and motherly landlady, gently drawing Victoria's story out of her and offering sympathy without pity. She also provided valuable information about Oroville and potential employment opportunities. The dressmaker, Miss Sullivan, has been complaining about being overwhelmed with work, Mrs. Chen mentioned over breakfast Victoria's third morning there. "You said you worked as a seamstress in Boston." Perhaps she would appreciate help. Victoria seized on the suggestion. Within an hour, she'd made her way to Miss Sullivan's dress shop, a tidy establishment on Main Street. Miss Sullivan turned out to be an Irish woman in her 40s with a quick wit and sharp eye for quality work. She examined the stitching on Victoria's traveling dress with professional interest. "This is fine work," she admitted. "Did you do it yourself?" "Yes, madam. I've been sewing since I was a girl." Miss Sullivan pursed her lips thoughtfully. "I could use help, truth be told. The wives of the mine managers and successful merchants want fancy dresses, and I can barely keep up with orders. I can't afford to pay much to start, but if you're as skilled as this suggests, we could work out a fair arrangement." Relief flooded through Victoria. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity." They agreed on a trial period, and Victoria threw herself into the work with determination. It felt good to have purpose again, to be doing something productive rather than dwelling on Edmund Hartwell's abandonment. Miss Sullivan's shop became a refuge, filled with beautiful fabrics and the satisfying rhythm of needle and thread. Knox returned to town exactly 5 days after their first meeting, appearing at Mrs. Chen's boarding house just as Victoria was returning from the dress shop in the early evening. Her heart gave an unexpected leap when she saw him on the porch, talking with Mrs. Chen. "Victoria," he greeted her, his face lighting up. "Mrs. Chen tells me you found work. That's wonderful." "Miss Sullivan hired me at her dress shop," Victoria confirmed, unable to suppress her smile. "It's good work and she's a fair employer." "I'm real glad to hear it." Knox seemed genuinely pleased. "I was wondering if you might take a walk with me after supper. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Curiosity and a flutter of nervousness mingled in Victoria's chest. "Of course." Over another of Mrs. Chen's excellent meals, Victoria found herself relaxing in Knox's company. He had an easy way about him, asking interested questions about her work and telling entertaining stories about ranch life. He described his ornery horse, Copper, who had a talent for escaping his stall, and his uncle's ongoing feud with a neighbor over water rights. "Uncle Robert's convinced old Mr. Hanson is diverting more than his share from the creek," Knox explained with a wry smile. "They've been arguing about it for 3 years now. I keep telling him they should just measure it proper and settle the matter, but I think they both enjoy the arguing too much to actually solve anything." Victoria laughed and realized it was the first time she genuinely laughed since arriving in California. Knox's eyes warmed at the sound. After supper, they walked through town as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Knox led her to a small park area near the edge of town where a few trees provided shade and a bench offered a place to sit. "I've been thinking about your situation," Knox began, his tone becoming more serious. "And I have a proposition for you. Please hear me out before you answer." Victoria's nervousness returned. "I'm listening." "My uncle's ranch is doing well, but we could use help around the place. His wife, my Aunt Martha, she's been struggling to manage the house and the cooking for all the hands on her own. She's not as young as she used to be, and it's wearing on her. I was thinking you might consider coming to work at the ranch. Room and board plus a fair wage. You'd have your own space in the house, and it would be proper. Aunt Martha would be there, so no question of impropriety." He rushed on before Victoria could respond. "I know it's not what you came west for, and it's hard work, but it would give you a steady income and time to figure out what you really want to do with your future. And honestly, it would be a godsend for Aunt Martha. She's been after Uncle Robert to hire help for months." Victoria considered the offer carefully. Part of her hesitated. She'd only just started at the dress shop, and Miss Sullivan was counting on her. But another part recognized the opportunity Knox was offering. Ranch work would pay better, and it would get her out of town where everyone knew her humiliating story. "What about Miss Sullivan?" Victoria asked. "I made a commitment to her." "That speaks well of you," Knox said approvingly. "Maybe you could talk to her, see if she'd be willing to let you go or if she needs you to stay on for a particular length of time. I'm not trying to rush you into anything." "I'll speak with her tomorrow," Victoria decided. "But Knox, I need to ask, this is genuinely about helping your aunt, isn't it? You're not offering out of pity or because you feel responsible for me." Knox met her eyes steadily. "It's a genuine need at the ranch, but I won't lie, I'd also like to see you settled somewhere safe and secure. These past few days, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you stranded at that station. You deserve better than what life's dealt you lately." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's throat tight. "You barely know me." "I'd like to know you better," Knox said quietly. "If you're amenable to that." The implication hung in the air between them. Victoria's pulse quickened. She'd noticed, of course, that Knox was handsome and kind, and everything Edmund's letters had promised, but the man himself had failed to be. She'd noticed the way Knox looked at her, with warmth and something deeper that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. But it was too soon, too fast, too complicated. "I think I'd like that too," Victoria admitted carefully. "But Knox, I need you to understand I came west expecting to marry a stranger. That didn't work out, and right now I don't know if I'm ready to think about courting or anything beyond simple friendship." "I understand completely," Knox assured her. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just being honest about my interest. Whatever happens, happens in its own time, or doesn't happen at all if that's what you decide." His patience and understanding made Victoria like him even more. "Thank you for being straightforward." They talked until full darkness fell, and Knox walked her back to Mrs. Chen's with perfect propriety. Over the next few days, Victoria spoke with Miss Sullivan, who proved understanding about the opportunity at the ranch. "It's steadier work than I can offer right now," Miss Sullivan admitted. "And better pay. I'll be sorry to lose you, but I won't stand in your way. If things don't work out, you come back and see me. I can usually use skilled hands during busy seasons." So it was settled. The following Saturday, Knox arrived with a wagon to transport Victoria and her few belongings to the Circle K ranch. Mrs. Chen packed a lunch for their journey and hugged Victoria warmly. "You take care of yourself, dear girl, and don't be a stranger come visit when you're in town." The 8-mile journey to the ranch took them through beautiful rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Knox pointed out landmarks and told her about the land, clearly loving the country they passed through. "This is wild land still," he explained. "Mountain lions in the hills, bears sometimes. But it's beautiful too. In spring, the wildflowers cover everything like a carpet." The Circle K ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling collection of buildings centered around a solid ranch house built of wood and stone. Corrals held horses and cattle, and several smaller structures served as bunkhouse, barn, and storage. It looked prosperous and well-maintained. Knox's uncle and aunt emerged from the house as the wagon pulled up. Robert Parker was a big, barrel-chested man in his 50s with Knox's blue eyes and a booming voice. Martha Parker was smaller and rounder, with gray-streaked brown hair and a kind face. "So you're the young lady Knox has been telling us about," Martha said, looking Victoria over with sharp but friendly eyes. "Welcome to the Circle K, dear. I'm mighty glad to have another woman around here. Living with all these men gets tiresome." "Don't listen to her," Robert laughed. "She runs roughshod over all of us. But we're pleased to have you, Miss Rose. Knox says you're a hard worker, and that's what we need around here." Martha took Victoria under her wing immediately, showing her to a small bedroom off the kitchen that would be her quarters. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a real window and a colorful quilt on the bed. "I made that quilt 30 years ago when Robert and I first married," Martha said fondly. "It's held up well. Now, let me show you around and explain what needs doing." The work was indeed hard, but satisfying. Victoria helped Martha with cooking for the ranch hands, cleaning, mending, and countless other tasks that kept a working ranch running smoothly. Martha turned out to be an excellent teacher and a warm companion, and the two women quickly developed a close friendship. Knox was around the ranch most days, working with the cattle and horses alongside his uncle and the half-dozen ranch hands they employed. Victoria found herself watching for him, her heart lifting whenever he appeared. They fell into a pattern of talking in the evenings after supper, sometimes walking around the ranch property as the day cooled, sometimes sitting on the porch while Martha and Robert sat nearby. "Tell me about Missouri," Victoria asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky. Knox leaned against the porch rail, his expression growing distant. "It was different from here. Greener, more trees. My father had a small farm, mostly crops. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to make it succeed." He paused, his voice roughening. "He died when I was 21. Heart gave out one day while he was plowing. I found him in the field." Victoria reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "I'm so sorry." "After that, there didn't seem much point staying. Uncle Robert wrote and offered me a place here, and I jumped at the chance to start fresh." Knox covered her hand with his own. "I've never regretted it. This land suits me." "I think I'm starting to understand that," Victoria said softly. "Boston was all I knew, but being here it's different. Bigger somehow. Like there's room to breathe." "That's exactly it," Knox agreed, his eyes intent on her face. "Room to become whoever you want to be without all the expectations and restrictions of back east." They talked late into the evening, sharing more of their histories, their hopes, their fears. Victoria found herself opening up to Knox in ways she'd never opened up to anyone, not even her father. There was something about Knox that made her feel safe enough to be completely honest. As summer deepened into fall, Victoria's feelings for Knox deepened as well. She tried to be cautious, reminding herself that she'd been fooled before by pretty words and promises. But Knox never made promises he didn't keep. He was steady, reliable, showing up day after day with the same genuine kindness and growing affection. Martha noticed, of course. One morning while they were making bread together, she brought it up with characteristic directness. "That nephew of mine is smitten with you," she said, kneading dough vigorously. "And unless I'm mistaken, you feel the same way." Victoria felt her cheeks heat. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to everyone with eyes," Martha said with a warm laugh. "Don't be embarrassed, dear. Knox is a good man. The best, really. He deserves someone who'll appreciate him, and I think you do." "I do," Victoria admitted quietly. "But Martha, I'm afraid. What if I'm wrong again? What if I've misjudged?" Martha stopped kneading and looked at Victoria seriously. "That man who left you at the station, he was a coward and a fool. Knox is neither. You've been here 4 months now. You've seen him in all kinds of situations, good days and hard days. Has he ever been anything but honest and decent with you?" "No," Victoria acknowledged. "He hasn't." "Then trust what you know, not what you fear," Martha advised. "Fear will hold you back from everything good in life if you let it." That evening, Knox asked Victoria to walk with him after supper. They headed toward a grove of oak trees on a rise overlooking the ranch. The evening was beautiful, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. "I need to tell you something," Knox said as they reached the trees. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. Victoria's heart began to pound. "What is it?" Knox took both her hands in his expression earnest. "Victoria, these past few months with you here have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you, talking with you, just being near you. You're everything I never knew I was looking for." "Knox," Victoria whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Wait, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came here for a fresh start, and I know you've been hurt. I don't want to rush you or pressure you, but I need you to know how I feel. I love you, Victoria. I think I've loved you since that first day at the station when you were trying so hard to be brave. I want to marry you, build a life with you. I want to give you the home and security you deserve." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've been so afraid to admit it even to myself, but I do. I love you, Knox Parker." Knox's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Say you'll marry me, please. I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Victoria said against his chest. "Yes, I'll marry you." Knox pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Victoria rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was sweet and tentative at first, then deepening as months of restrained feelings finally found expression. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I can't believe you're mine," Knox murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "I can't believe I almost missed this," Victoria replied. "If Edmund had shown up that day—" "Don't," Knox interrupted gently. "Don't think about what might have been. We're here now, and that's all that matters." They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and when they announced their engagement, Martha let out a whoop of delight that brought Robert running from the barn. "About time," Robert declared, shaking Knox's hand enthusiastically. "We've been watching you two dance around each other for months. When's the wedding?" Knox looked at Victoria. "Whenever you want, love. Tomorrow, if you're willing." Victoria laughed. "How about we give ourselves a bit more time to plan? Maybe a month." "A month sounds perfect," Knox agreed. The next weeks passed in a flurry of happy preparation. Martha helped Victoria sew a wedding dress from cream-colored silk that Miss Sullivan sold them at cost. Mrs. Chen insisted on providing the wedding cake. The whole town of Oroville, it seemed, was delighted by the romance the mail-order bride abandoned at the station, who'd found true love with the cowboy who rescued her. They were married on a crisp November morning in Oroville's small church. Victoria wore her silk dress and carried a bouquet of the last autumn wildflowers. Knox stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Knox slipped the wedding ring onto Victoria's finger, his hand trembled slightly with emotion. "I promise to love you and protect you all my days," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "And I promise to love you and stand beside you always," Victoria replied, her own voice thick with tears. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Knox kissed her with such tender passion that the small congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was joyful and rowdy. The whole town seemed to turn out, wanting to wish the newlyweds well. Even Miss Sullivan came, pressing a package into Victoria's hands. "Something for your trousseau," she said with a knowing smile. As evening fell, Knox and Victoria finally escaped to the small house Knox had been secretly preparing for weeks. It was just a few hundred yards from the main ranch house, a two-room cabin that Knox had cleaned, repaired, and furnished as his wedding gift to her. "It's not much yet," Knox said as he carried her over the threshold. "But it's ours, and we can add on as we need to." Victoria looked around the cozy space, a bedroom with a real iron bedstead covered in quilts, a main room with a stove, table, and comfortable chairs. Curtains hung at the windows and a rag rug covered the wooden floor. It was simple and small, but it was home. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Absolutely perfect." That night, in the privacy of their little house, they became husband and wife in every sense. Knox was gentle and patient, treating Victoria with reverent care. She'd been nervous, but his tenderness eased her fears, and what she discovered in his arms was a physical expression of the deep emotional connection they'd built over months of friendship and courtship. Afterward, wrapped in Knox's arms beneath the warm quilts, Victoria felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be, not with Edmund Hartwell, who would have been a stranger sharing her bed, but here, with Knox, the man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. "What are you thinking?" Knox murmured against her hair. That I'm grateful, Victoria said softly, for everything that happened, even the painful parts, because it brought me here to you. Knox tightened his arms around her. I love you, Mrs. Parker. I love you too, Victoria whispered, and drifted off to sleep feeling safe, cherished, and finally home. Life as Knox's wife brought new routines and new joys. Victoria continued helping Martha at the main house, but now she also had her own home to manage. She discovered she loved creating a space that was uniquely theirs, sewing curtains and cushions, learning to cook Knox's favorite meals, making their little cabin into a real home. Knox proved to be everything a husband should be: hardworking, devoted, and unfailingly thoughtful. He brought her wildflowers for no reason. He built her shelves for her growing collection of books. When winter came and she was trapped inside during storms, he taught her to play chess, laughing at her competitive spirit. You're a terrible loser, he teased one evening after she'd won 3 games in a row. I'm an excellent winner, though, Victoria shot back with a grin. The first real test of their marriage came in January when a severe storm struck. Knox had been out checking on distant pastures when the blizzard hit unexpectedly. Victoria waited anxiously as hours passed with no sign of him, trying not to panic. Martha came to sit with her as darkness fell. He knows this land like the back of his hand, she reassured Victoria. He'll hole up somewhere safe and wait out the worst of it. But as the night wore on with no word, Victoria's worry grew into real fear. She couldn't lose him, not now, not when she'd finally found happiness. She paced the floor of their cabin, praying desperately for his safe return. Just before dawn, she heard Copper's whinny outside. Victoria flew to the door, flinging it open to find Knox stumbling through the snow, nearly frozen but alive. She helped him inside, her hands shaking with relief and residual fear. I'm all right, Knox managed through chattering teeth. Got caught on the far range, had to shelter in the line shack overnight. Victoria got him out of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, and held him close until his shivering subsided. Only when she was sure he was truly safe did she allow herself to cry. I was so scared, she admitted against his chest. I thought I'd lost you. Hey, look at me, Knox said gently, tilting her chin up. I'm here, I'm safe. It takes more than a snowstorm to keep me from coming home to you. Promise me you'll be more careful, Victoria pleaded. I can't lose you, Knox, I can't. I promise, he said solemnly. I've got too much to live for now to take foolish risks. The scare brought them even closer. Victoria realized how deeply she'd come to depend on Knox, not just for security but for happiness itself. He was her best friend, her lover, her partner in every sense. Spring arrived with its explosion of wildflowers, just as Knox had promised. He took Victoria riding through the hills to see the carpets of gold and purple covering the ground. They had picnics beneath the oak trees and talked about their dreams for the future. I want to expand our herd, Knox shared. Uncle Robert's thinking about retiring in a few years, letting me take over the ranch. We could build it into something really substantial, something to pass down to our children someday. Children, Victoria repeated softly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. She'd been wondering for a few weeks now if she might be carrying their first child, but she hadn't been certain enough to tell Knox yet. Knox noticed the gesture immediately, his eyes widening. Victoria. Are you saying? I think so, she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. It's early yet, but I'm fairly certain. Knox let out a shout of pure joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. We're going to have a baby, Lord Victoria. You've made me the happiest man alive. They told Martha and Robert that evening, and the celebration rivaled their wedding day. Martha immediately started knitting baby clothes, and Robert began talking about adding onto their cabin to make room for the nursery. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Victoria continued working as long as she was able, finally restricting herself to lighter tasks as fall approached and her belly grew round. Knox was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Victoria told him exasperatedly one evening when he tried to prevent her from walking to the main house alone. "I know, but humor me," Knox replied, not backing down. "You're carrying the most precious thing in the world to me, both of you." Victoria softened, as she always did when Knox was being sweet. "We're both fine, strong and healthy." Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire ranch. Knox was beside Victoria through the whole ordeal, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement even as his face went pale at her pain. "He's perfect," the midwife announced, placing the squirming bundle in Victoria's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a healthy set of lungs." Knox stared at his son with wonder written all over his face. "He's so small," he whispered, carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. When the infant's fingers closed around Knox's much larger one, tears spilled down his cheeks. "Hello, little man, I'm your pa." They named him James Robert Parker, after both grandfathers. From the moment of his birth, James became the center of their universe. Knox proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint. Victoria watched her husband with their son and felt her heart could hardly contain all the love she felt. "I never imagined being this happy," she confessed to Martha one afternoon while James napped. "You two deserve it," Martha said warmly. "You've both worked hard and been through hardships. This joy is earned." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. True to his word, Robert began turning over more responsibility to Knox, who proved to have a natural talent for management and leadership. They expanded the herd and built new facilities. The Circle K became known throughout the region for quality cattle and honest dealing. Victoria found her own role expanding as well. She began keeping the ranch's books, discovering she had a head for numbers and organization. She also started a small enterprise of her own, sewing and selling fancy work to ladies in Oroville and the surrounding towns. The extra income went into savings, building their security for the future. When James was 2, Victoria became pregnant again. This time she was less nervous and more confident, knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny thing with Victoria's dark hair and Knox's blue eyes. "Emily Victoria Parker," Knox announced, cradling his daughter with the same wonder he'd shown with James. "She's going to be a heartbreaker, just like her mother." Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. Robert and Martha eventually moved to a smaller house in town, officially handing the Circle K over to Knox and Victoria. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under their management. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch work from an early age. Emily proved to be a spitfire, fearless and determined, keeping both parents on their toes. One evening, when James was 7 and Emily 5, Victoria and Knox sat on the porch of their house, which had been expanded several times and was now a proper ranch house. They watched their children playing in the yard as the sun set behind the hills. "Do you ever think about that day at the station?" Knox asked, his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "Sometimes," Victoria admitted, "but not with regret, never with regret." "I thank God for that day," Knox said quietly. "If Edmund Hartwell had shown up, I would never have met you. My whole life would be different." Victoria leaned into her husband's embrace. Everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to. I was meant to be here with you, building this life together. I love you, Knox said, as he did every day. Today, tomorrow, and always. And I love you, Victoria replied, turning to kiss him. Forever. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Victoria had arrived in Oroville expecting to marry a stranger and build a practical life. Instead, she'd found true love with a cowboy who'd offered to take her home. And in doing so, she discovered that home wasn't a place, it was wherever Knox was, wherever their family was, wherever love resided. Years continued to pass in happiness and prosperity. The Circle K became one of the most successful ranches in the region. James eventually married a sweet girl from town and brought her to live on the ranch, building his own house on the property. Emily surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, though she continued to live at home and help with the ranch during summers. Knox and Victoria grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges, droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and personal losses. But they faced everything together, their partnership stronger for having weathered so many storms. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Knox took Victoria back to the oak grove where he'd first proposed. It was a warm November day, much like their wedding day had been. 25 years, Knox marveled, holding both her hands. Seems like yesterday and like forever all at once. Victoria looked at her husband, his hair now streaked with gray but his eyes still as blue and warm as ever. Best 25 years of my life. Mine too, Knox said softly. He pulled a small box from his pocket. I got you something. Inside was a delicate gold locket. Victoria opened it to find tiny photographs of James and Emily inside. Knox, it's beautiful, she breathed. Not as beautiful as you, he replied, fastening it around her neck. 25 years, and you still take my breath away. They kissed under the oak trees, still as much in love as they'd been as newlyweds. More, perhaps, because their love had been tested and proven true again and again. Eventually, they returned to the ranch house where family and friends had gathered for a surprise celebration. James and his wife were there with their 3 children. Emily had brought her young man, a banker from Oroville whom she'd been courting. Martha and Robert, now quite elderly but still spry, sat in places of honor. Mrs. Chen had provided the cake. Miss Sullivan brought a beautiful tablecloth she'd embroidered specially for the occasion. As Victoria looked around at all the people who'd become part of their life, she was overcome with gratitude. She caught Knox's eye across the room, and he smiled at her with such love that tears filled her eyes. Later, after the guests had gone and they were alone in their bedroom, Knox held Victoria close. Any regrets? He asked, as he sometimes did. Not a single one, Victoria replied honestly. My life turned out better than I ever dreamed possible. Mine too, Knox murmured. Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for finding me at that station, Victoria replied. Thank you for offering to take me home, for giving me a home. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the love they'd found and the life they'd built together. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting together on the porch watching their grandchildren play, Victoria would sometimes think back to that terrified girl standing alone on the train platform in Oroville. She'd been so afraid, so uncertain of her future. She'd thought her life was ruined when Edmund Hartwell hadn't shown up. But that disappointment had been a gift in disguise, leading her straight into the arms of the man she was meant to love. Knox Parker had offered to take her home, and in doing so had given her everything she'd ever wanted: love, family, security, and a partnership that had lasted a lifetime. They grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren, respected in their community and deeply, enduringly in love. When Knox passed peacefully in his sleep at 84, Victoria held his hand and whispered her final goodbye, knowing they'd had more happiness together than most people found in 10 lifetimes. She followed him 2 years later, dying quietly in the same bed where they'd spent so many nights together. Their children found her there in the morning, a peaceful smile on her face, the old locket with James and Emily's pictures still around her neck. They buried her next to Knox on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the oak trees where he'd proposed so many years before. The headstone reads simply, "Victoria Rose Parker, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she found home," because that was the truth of it. Victoria had traveled west expecting one future and found something infinitely better. She'd been abandoned by a man she'd never met, only to be rescued by the man she was meant to love. And that cowboy who'd offered to take her home had given her not just shelter, but a lifetime of love, happiness, and belonging that exceeded her wildest dreams. Their love story became legend in Oroville, the mail-order bride who'd been abandoned at the station and the cowboy who'd found her there. People told the story for generations, always with the same moral. Sometimes the worst disappointments lead to the greatest blessings. Sometimes what seems like disaster is actually fate working in your favor. And sometimes, the person who offers you help when you need it most turns out to be the person you were meant to spend your whole life loving. Knox and Victoria's descendants continued working the Circle K Ranch for generations, always remembering the love story that had founded their family legacy. And on the hill under the oak trees, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of a love that had conquered every obstacle and lasted beyond death itself.